Well, we're going to begin a new topic now about the endocrine system. So most of the feedback loops I previously talked about are actually not controlled by the nervous system, but by the endocrine system, which is a fancy way of saying hormones. Hormones, of course, are secreted by glands, and the reason that they're defined as hormones is because they're secreted directly into the blood system. So sweat glands, for example, would not become part of the endocrine system, or all the digestive juices, for example, that the pancreas makes that go into the intestine. Those aren't really hormones because they go through a duct, that's DUCT, which goes directly into the intestine, doesn't go through a blood system. Anyway, there's considered to be three types of hormones here: steroid, peptide, and amino acid. It's always good to have an example of each one. Steroids are fatty hormones. Anything that ends in kind of ONE, estrogen, progesterone, cortisone, those are probably steroids, like testosterone. Then you got your peptides, which is basically a way of saying a small protein. Insulin would be a great example of that. And amino acids, like tyrosine or Thanksgiving Day turkey, tryptophan, would be another example of an amino acid. Now, why is it important to know the types? Because we know that the membrane of a cell is a bilayer phospholipid, so some things have trouble getting through there. I'm going to skip ahead here, actually, and talk about steroids first. Now, steroids, since they're fats, don't have any trouble getting through the membrane, so they'd go right through there, and they get into the nucleus, in fact, and they bind directly to the DNA, and that's kind of how they work. But non-steroid ones, like the peptides or the amino acids, they have a lot of trouble getting in there. What typically happens is that they will bind to a receptor, some protein on the outside of the membrane, which then is an integral protein, and maybe it goes all the way through the membrane and then can activate things inside there. So it does its work by never actually getting through the membrane. Okay, let's talk about the endocrine system in large. Lots of organs in the endocrine system. We don't need to know all of them, so I'm going to actually cross a few of them out here. I don't think we really need to deal with the pineal gland. We do need to know the hypothalamus and the pituitary. They're both located in the brain. Well, actually, the hypothalamus is in the brain. The pituitary is just below the base of the brain. The hypothalamus, as we'll discover in just a moment, is actually the part of the endocrine gland system which monitors hormones. And the pituitary gland is what we will call the master gland. It actually controls all the other glands in the body. Who are the other guys there? Well, we got the thyroid, that's located in the neck, and the parathyroid, which is also located in the neck. So those guys are right there. I don't think we need to know about the thymus. The adrenal gland, though, is an important one. That's located right on top of the kidneys there. And you can guess that the adrenal gland probably makes our favorite hormone, adrenaline, which also was a neurotransmitter. That's another story, though. Then we've got the pancreas. Now, we've seen the pancreas, which is involved in the digestive system. It produces all of those good enzymes which go into the intestine. So actually, the pancreas is both an endocrine gland, because it makes insulin, for example, but it's also what we call an exocrine gland, EXO, exocrine. And those are chemicals which get secreted through ducts, like sweat would be doing, or in this case, the digestive juices. So the pancreas would also be part of the endocrine system. And then depending if you're female or male, you got your gonads here. That's actually a word, and I'll spell that out here. So gonads, right? Let's see, how'd I do there on my spelling? Not too good. Let's back up. Great. Gonads are the ovary, depending if you're a woman, and testis, or testes if you're a male. And they're obviously going to make the female and male hormones. So that is way down here, yeah? Okay, so those are the basic organs we're going to deal with. Let's go ahead and see how things come into play now. So let's start off with the pituitary, which is in the base of the brain. The pituitary is known as the master gland. Why is it called that? Because it will control the hormone regulation of all of the other glands. It will control the thyroid and the adrenal and so forth. Pituitary is so important that it's actually divided into two parts. Most of the hormones come from the anterior, which means the front of the pituitary, but we have a couple that come from the posterior. And the posterior is actually considered to be part of the nervous system, which is kind of a strange idea. Now, there's a host of hormones that we see here, growth hormone and so forth. Not important at this point for us to memorize all these names. Let's just go through here. So, the pituitary is going to control all these other guys. So it might control the thyroid, which is located in the neck. What is the thyroid involved in? Well, the thyroid is involved in metabolism. So people who seem to be a little nervous, on edge, or maybe a little depressed have problems with their thyroid. Who are the hormones that come out of there? T3 and T4. Both of them are considered to be peptide-type hormones. Right besides the thyroid are four little dots, which are called the parathyroid gland. They're very small, but actually they're quite important. We can't live without them. And there are two hormones that come out of there. One is calcitonin, which regulates calcium in our bones. And the other is parathyroid, which also can remove calcium and put it back into the blood. So just like we saw with insulin and glucagon, these two guys here are actually kind of opposites. One puts in the calcium, one takes out the calcium. Then we've got our adrenal gland, which sits on top of the kidneys. Makes a ton of different hormones. If you only could remember one, I'd say adrenaline, right? And in general, the adrenal gland kind of controls our salt and water balance. Testes. Assuming you're a male, well, obviously the testes got its name because it makes testosterone, a steroid-type hormone, which is involved in the maturation of sperm and second sexual characteristics. And finally, we've got down here the ovaries. And hormones that come out of the ovaries would be estrogen or estrogen and progesterone, which are, again, that ONE, are steroid-type hormones. Okay, let's put it all together here. So, let's make a big feedback loop. The hypothalamus is up in the brain. And what the hypothalamus does, it is monitoring the levels of hormones in the blood. And if the hypothalamus decides that the levels are off, right, it would then send a signal down to the pituitary. How does it do that? It does that with a special kind of hormone which is called a releasing hormone. Whoops, wow, big letters there. A releasing hormone. Okay, so that's how it signals the anterior pituitary. And then the anterior pituitary, being the master gland, goes ahead and says, oh, I need to contact, say, the thyroid gland to get the thyroid gland to make more of its hormones. And once those levels are okay, then the hypothalamus would be happy again. So let's put it all together. The hypothalamus is monitoring the levels of hormones in the blood. If it finds that they're off, it tells the master gland, the pituitary, you need to get on the stick here and get these levels up. The pituitary says, well, what hormone is down? Let's suppose it was the thyroid hormone, T3 or T4. So the pituitary would then tell the thyroid, who in this case is the target gland, you need to make more of its hormone. It would then produce more of the hormone, T3, T4, which would go back to the hypothalamus, right? And that would then go down, and the hypothalamus would say, I'm happy, and therefore we have negative feedback in that case. And in this model here, you could substitute for the target gland any of those endocrine glands I talked about, and you could substitute any of the hormones that they made. Let's just take a look at some quick examples of who we could substitute in here. So here about my example of the thyroid. The hypothalamus would measure a thyroid hormone. If it didn't like it, it would release thyroid releasing hormone, which would go to the pituitary, which would then go ahead and stimulate the thyroid gland to make more thyroid hormones, which would come back up here, negative feedback, and turn off the hypothalamus. Same thing could happen to the parathyroid. How about this one here? This one here is a growth hormone. Same thing could happen there. Same thing could happen in the adrenal gland, right? Let's suppose that we're not making enough cortisol, which is a hormone that comes out of the adrenal gland. So negative feedback, right? We'd come up here, we'd stimulate then, tell the hypothalamus, oops, no good. Hypothalamus would have some releasing hormone to the pituitary. Pituitary would tell the adrenal gland, you better get on the stick, and it starts making more cortisol, and then we get, once again, our negative feedback loop.